The following program is a UW-TV classic.
From the University of Washington in Seattle, Upon Reflection with Al Page. Our guest is best-selling author P.D. James.
Is living gracefully despite tragedy the real test of human character?
Oh, I think for me, yes, it's certainly one of the truest. Yes, I think grace under pressure, grace under tragedy is tremendously important.
Is that something you're born with?
I suspect to an extent it is. I mean, this raises the question, and it's an incredibly difficult one, how much any of us are responsible for what we are and what we do, in a sense. If certain people do seem to be born good and born brave, don't they? Others have to strive rather more for these qualities.
It's frustrating when you look at those people, isn't it?
Oh, absolutely. Sometimes even as children you see them, don't you, that they come into the world and you feel that they feel the world is a friendly place for them. They have great generosity of spirit, great kindness, and they stay like that all their lives.
You often write about a detective who lost his wife and his son in childbirth. How would that detective act differently if he hadn't gone through that experience?
Well, I think with Dalgleish it's had one effect that one would say perhaps wasn't a particularly good one, in that it makes him very reluctant to commit himself ever again in a close human relationship. It makes him rather cold. I think he feels probably that to love someone very deeply is in the end to be very deeply hurt, and he's not willing to risk it again. And this may also be because I've made him a poet, and I think very often poets, writers, musicians, painters have a great need of privacy and guarded jealousy, and he certainly does that. I suppose one would say, really, Al, it should make him more sympathetic. And I think it does. I mean, it gives him a very strong sense of the heartbreak at the heart of things. And this must be true of anyone who suffered a great tragedy.
Can one ever fully express in words the pain an individual is suffering?
Oh.
Do you struggle with that when you write about it?
You can only try. You can only attempt to feel it vicariously, or try to remember what it felt like, and to find the words in which to express it. And I suppose the greatest novelists have more or less succeeded. And of course I think Shakespeare succeeded in Lear, for example. But it is incredibly difficult.
When you write about pain, do you know when you've got it right? Can you say to yourself, that passage is good, or that passage is no good?
I think you can feel this is as right as I can get it. I don't think you ever feel, at least I don't, this is perfect. Nobody else could do it better. But you feel this is as good as I can get it. And then there is a sense of satisfaction about it, a feeling that, yes, this is right. Dorothy L. Sayers said the feeling like God on the seventh day. That may be putting it a little strongly. But I think most writers do have a tremendous sense of satisfaction when they feel they have got it right.
Your husband came back from World War II a broken man, so you've had your own personal tragedy. Did that change the way that you looked at other human beings, the way that you looked at life? Did that change you in some sense?
I wonder, it's very, very difficult to stand aside from that kind of experience and ask yourself how it affects you. It certainly made me resilient, I think, and independent, because obviously I had to earn a living for him and for my family. I had to be, in a sense, well, I was the wage earner. The whole family had to depend on me. So it produced, I suppose, a certain amount of resolution and ambition and determination.
Did it affect your ability to write about tragedy?
I suppose it did to an extent, yes. Yes. It gave me a wariness too about life, I think, a feeling that I'm very lucky to be happy and that good things have happened to me. But one can never ever take the good things for granted. Life is basically precarious, and that happiness is basically precarious.
Let's talk about your craft a bit. On the day of the murder in one of your books, you know what every character is doing every 10 minutes of that day, but the reader doesn't.
Oh yes, you must. And this means, of course, that it has to be down in black and white in notebooks. I have to do a tremendous amount of research before I'm ready to write the book. And there will be a page in one of these notebooks with every 10 minutes, it depends on the need of the plot, but really every 10 minutes of the day of the murder accounted for, and I know where everybody is. The problem, of course, is that there is the truth of the situation, there is the truth about where all the suspects are, and then there are the stories they may tell to the police, of course, which are different, so that the thing does become extremely complicated. But all those details have to be very carefully worked out before the actual writing begins.
You plot out the time frame for the entire book.
Yes, you do.
How does that process go?
Well, perhaps it's easier if I really sort of sense again at the beginning, when I think, you know, the book begins with me, with a place, and the original impulse, the original creative impulse, the feeling, here is a book and I want to write it. And then I begin thinking about the people, and they gradually come to life. And there will be these notebooks, and I'll start jotting down who they are. Then I decide fairly early on who's going to be killed, and then very quickly after that, by whom and why. And the why is tremendously important, and really one of the most difficult parts of the modern mystery, because murder is still the unique crime, and the sanctions against murder, legal sanctions and religious sanctions and social sanctions, are very great, and the readers are powerfully aware of them. So you need a very strong motive deliberately to do to death another human being.
And when you decide who is going to be killed, do you do this with a certain amount of glee?
No, I don't think I do. And I try to have some sympathy with the murdered person, and sometimes even with the murderer. No, I don't think so. But then it has been suggested that, in fact, people who write mysteries and those who enjoy reading them, one of the satisfactions is that you can, as it were, sublimate some of your more aggressive instincts. You can, in fact, literally kill people off, or enjoy reading about people, and yet know that in the end it's all going to be all right, because the murder is going to be discovered and the murder is going to be punished, and that you haven't really done it.
This process of laying out the book, it could take as long as 18 months?
It could be. It often has been. I must say with the last one, with Devices and Desires, it was much quicker. Unusually quick for me. And the plot came together very fast. And I began writing it, I think, about 6 months after I first got the idea, or at least after I first started plotting it. It is fast for me. It can be much slower.
And what reference books do you use? Forensic medicine, famous British trials?
Yes, I use Professor Simpson's book on forensic medicine. Actually, he is now dead and someone else is editing it, but I still, and their name is associated with it, but I still think of it as primarily being Professor Simpson's book on forensic medicine, which is excellent. I've got the 8th edition of that. But because I worked for many years in the British Home Office, and in the department concerned with police and forensic science, I do know senior policemen, and I know a great many forensic scientists. So that what I do is visit the Metropolitan Police Forensic Science Laboratory in Lambeth and talk to the forensic biologists and the forensic scientists and find, you know, what is up to date. I didn't need to do that so much with the last one, because I did with one before, because there was a great deal of evidence about bloodstains and blood examination. There's less forensic evidence here, but of course I needed to do a great deal of research into atomic power and how an atomic power station is run, which was new for me.
Here you're killing off all these people, but you refuse to go see an autopsy. Why?
Well, I would feel like a voyeur. I don't need to see an autopsy, because I can read books and I know what happens at an autopsy. And I can perfectly well visualize it, so that when I describe an autopsy, I know I'm describing it accurately. I remember once there was a group of crime writers, and they were going to watch an autopsy, and I said, I don't want to come. And they said, oh, well, why? And I said, well, if it was somebody I loved being cut up, I wouldn't want a whole lot of people looking around and watching. And one woman said, oh, but it isn't anything anybody loves. It's going to be a tramp. I said, well, what difference does that make? He's a human being. He was a human being. I mean, I think if I needed to do it, I would do it. I mean, all writers would. If I really felt I couldn't write without it, I would do it. But I wouldn't do it just out of curiosity. And I don't think it's necessary for me to do it.
Once the book is laid out, do you begin to write the book, or do the characters begin to write the book? Are they so strong in your mind that you're just going along with them?
Yes, you are, but you see, you're controlling them at the same time. I think I'm writing the book. And what is interesting is, as I write it, the characters very often change rather subtly. It's as if the story and the characters and everything about them exist outside myself in some limbo of the imagination or in my subconscious. And I'm getting in touch with them and getting them down in black and white, so that it's a process of revelation rather than a process of creation. And during this process, and I need to be very quiet and alone and have time to do it, they reveal themselves to me in interesting ways, so that I feel, well, I didn't think the character was going to be quite like that. And I think this can happen to a lot of writers.
The further you get into the book, do you have to worry about intellectualizing too much?
Yes, I think you do. It's not basically an intellectual process. It's a very strange process, and I don't think many writers really understand it. I don't think we know how we write, and many of us don't really know why we write. But I think if you try to make it too intellectual, then somehow it fails. It has to be emotion controlled.
What do you mean by emotion controlled?
You've got to feel and feel deeply, but you've got to control what you're feeling. In other words, if you are writing about something that is tragic and painful, you must feel the tragedy and the pain, but with part of your mind you must thinking, yes, that's not quite the right word, I've got to change that. What is the right word? And that combination of feeling and expressing feeling at the same time is very complicated, I think.
Do you try to put yourself on a schedule to get so many pages out each day, or to spend X amount of time each day?
I spend a certain amount of time each day. I find when I've started a book that there is a huge advantage in staying with the book. I'm in the world of the book. I'm living my life with these people. And if I put it on one side, then I actually go back. I not only lose pace, but I regress. So it seems to me that I ought to try and work each day. But some days are very productive, and I can work quite a long time. Others, really, I feel I'm getting nowhere. And of course, what I think every reader has to decide is, do you, even on those days, sit at the desk and go on making yourself do it, or do you just accept that today it isn't really going so well? But what I do is I get up fairly early in the morning and do about 3 hours. I can't really do much more than 3 hours of actual creative work. I find it is very tiring. After 3 years, I have 3 hours, I'm pretty exhausted.
Do you ever get bored with a character? You just want to get rid of them because you can't stand him or her anymore?
No, I suppose if I did, I'd cut them out of the book. Some of them I don't like very much. And of course, it's very difficult if you are describing people who are rather boring. Because, you know, they may be, because they are boring to you and boring to the reader. But on the whole, I don't feel bored by them.
When do you write the last chapter?
Well, not usually at the end of the book. I write books out of order, usually, and then put them together at the end. So I might write the last chapter fairly early on. It's a very important chapter. I mean, I think the first and the last chapters are very important, and I like to bring the book almost full circle, in a sense. I like there to be a sense of resolution, a sense of completion. It's a difficult chapter to get absolutely right. And so is the chapter which may be the last chapter, but may not, you know, in which the detective has to explain the mystery, or somebody has to explain the clues and actually who did it. And of course it was so easy in the so-called golden days of the 30s, because all that happened was the amateur detective called everybody into the library after dinner. They were usually in a country house somewhere, and, you know, propounded the case against each in turn. Well, that just isn't good enough in a modern mystery, and life isn't like that.
You have a lot of details in your books. Is it hard to write details and still be creative?
Yes, I suppose some people may say I have too much detail. I like the detail. I think on the whole my readers like it. Details of place, details of rooms, After all, people's houses and the things they choose to surround themselves with are indicators of character, very strong indicators of character. And I like the sense of place to come from the page, and that's very largely a matter of putting detail together, really.
We've talked about source books for your writing, a forensic source book, for example. Is Jane Austen another source book for your writing, an example of good writing?
She's an example of good writing. She's a wonderful example of marvelous construction. She's overwhelmingly my favorite writer, and I think I'm very strongly influenced by her. I mean, Emma is a superb detective story. There's no murder. In fact, there's no crime if we accept the despoiling of Mrs. Weston's turkey houses. But the way in which the clues to the relationships, the clues to the truths of the relationship are laid in that book is absolutely brilliant.
Let's change the subject once again and talk about the relations between men and women. In your books, you deal a lot with those kinds of relationships. In American slang, we say there's a battle between the sexes. In real life, is there a battle between the sexes?
Well, it's a rather simplistic view of life, I think, to think there's a battle between the sexes, really.
Let me ask it a different way. In your book, characters often don't fully reveal themselves to their lovers. When you think about male-female relationships, do both parties often wear a mask?
I think this is possible, yes. I mean, it raises the question how far one human being can fully know another human being, even in a very loving and close relationship. How far do we truly even know ourselves, let alone those we love? And I think often in a very close relationship, and certainly in a family relationship, there is a need for a human being, whether a man or a woman, to retain the individuality, to feel that I'm just not, you know, a husband, wife, daughter, son. I am uniquely myself. And often the pressure of a relationship, even if it's a very close relationship, I suppose can make a man or a woman feel that somehow that essential self is threatened. I don't think I see it in quite such crude terms as a battle, but I know there are a large number of feminists, for example, who do see it absolutely as a battle, and a battle to be fought. I've never ever felt that, although I would still say that all over the world women are very greatly disadvantaged, probably much less so in the societies in which we women make the most fuss about it.
In your latest book, there is a passage by a character dealing with, quote, the extraordinary complexities and irrationalities of human motives, human behavior. In real life, do human beings have trouble controlling their emotions?
Oh, I think very often they are. Much stronger than the ability to control them. And certain strong emotions, emotions of anger and jealousy and resentment, can be extremely destructive, and we see that every day, don't we, in the violence in society, which is, I suppose, one of the things in life that I'm most frightened of. And perhaps that's why I write detective fiction, because it's a way of, in a sense, dealing with that fear, because you are creating order out of disorder. That's what a detective story, what a mystery is about. You are somehow helping yourself to face the reality of violence. Violence is terrifying, and violence arises from strong emotions inadequately controlled.
You often talk about sex in your books. Is sex another emotion like violence, where humans find it difficult to control?
Well, it's one of the strongest of all, isn't it? And of course, I think in a detective story, it produces, in any detective story really, it produces so many of the motives. And we deal with it, I think, much more realistically now, and I hope more honestly. But even if you go back to the early days of the mystery in the 1930s and the Agatha Christie's of this world, sex was nearly always one of the motives. Yes, it produces, doesn't it, jealousy and often hatred.
And perhaps even a murder.
Oh, perhaps. No, yes. Yes, I think in one book, there's Dalgleish is recalling what an old sergeant told him when he was a new constable. And this old sergeant says to him, "They'll tell you, laddie, that the most dangerous emotion in the world is hatred. Don't you believe it? The most dangerous emotion in the world is love. And I think many of these books are concerned with the damage that is done through love.
You've alluded to this before, but I still want to ask you once again, in your own mind, is there such a thing as love without strings? Is there such a thing as true love?
I suppose, in a sense, the purest love, and I'm using the sense in the love which is most without self-interest, without self-concern, which isn't looking for what it gets back, is the love of a parent for a child. But very often in love, we make demands, don't we? We have such huge egos, all of us. And in so many emotions, what we really want to do is to satisfy our own needs. And yet, you see, what is, I suppose, so interesting is that if you have someone who is absolutely loving without thought of self, is that always good for the other person? I mean, some of these emotions, like self-regard, have their good side, don't they? It's very difficult to live with someone who really was totally selfless.
I'm always struck by the fact that these are issues that you're willing to explore in a mystery format.
Yes. I think I use a form which fascinates me because of my love of structure, and which is a popular form, and still feel that I can deal with these issues and still say something true about men and women and about society, and still show the complexity of human beings and this wonderful mixture of good and evil, all this, and how nothing is simple. I mean, in Devices and Disasters, we have this elderly priest, and he's a very good man. He's an extremely good man. But when someone in great need is consulting him, he's still a little impatient because he wants to get back to his book. He's still selfish, basically. And we're like that.
In Innocent Blood, you wrote about a person who had the mind of a thriller writer, obsessive, guilt-ridden, preoccupied with trivia. Phyllis, is this your mind?
No, I don't think so. That's what the girl speaking, that was Philippa, wasn't it? That's how, as she saw thriller writers, that's what she thought they were like. I think there's always the difference between what you make your character say and think and what you may say and think yourself. I would imagine, though, that most people who construct mysteries are likely to be perhaps more obsessive than they are paranoid. I think I'm slightly obsessive, probably. And one does need to have a great eye for detail and to be concerned with detail, because detail is so important in the fabrication of plots. And it may be because women have got this eye for detail that women are successful at writing that particular kind of crime novel.
The passage in Innocent Blood continued, he had lived too long with the thoughts of death. Have you lived too long with the thoughts of death?
No, I don't think I have lived too long with the thoughts of death. I was aware of death, powerfully aware of death at a very early age. I don't know why, but I've always been aware of death. And even when I was quite young, I can imagine feeling at times, yes, but what does it all matter, because we'll be dead in the end. You see, it's going to happen to every one of us, so you have to be powerfully aware of death. Of course, when you get, as I am, going to be 70 this year, you are more powerfully aware of death. It doesn't mean that you're more afraid of it or particularly dreading it, but it is an inescapable fact of life. I think one of the characters in one of my books quotes, is it a 17th century writer who says, our cradles are set in the grave. From the moment we're born, death is there. And I do think it interests me. It always has.
I want to push the point a little bit more. You write about death year after year. Has that made you more afraid of death, less afraid of death?
No, I imagine I mean, it's very difficult for any writer to examine the springs of her own subconscious. I would imagine that this is one way in which I come to terms with a possible fear of it. I don't think I'm more afraid of it than other people. I'm fairly resigned in a sense, I suppose, about it. But you see, with the mystery, you are intellectualizing it. You're making it into a puzzle. You're confronting it vicariously. And this may be one way of dealing with what otherwise would be an inconvenient fear. a worry.
In another passage, in another book you wrote, because this was fiction, problems could be solved, evil overcome, justice vindicated, and death itself only a mystery that would be solved in the final chapter. Does writing about death allow you to create order out of chaos?
Oh yes, it does. I think this is, though, one of the differences between, again, the modern mystery and the one of the 30s. Because in the 30s, Eden was restored. I mean, the mystery very often took place in a village or small town, mayhem parlor, which, despite its above-average homicide rate, really never loses its essential peace or innocence. And at the end, you feel the blood isn't real. You know, the vicar may find a body on the drawing room floor, but it isn't going to upset his sermon on Sunday. It's all beautifully restored. And I think now, with the modern mystery, at the end of the book, you feel, yes, the murder has been solved. It wouldn't be a mystery if the murder wasn't solved. But lives have been changed, irrevocably changed. This contaminating crime has touched them. And nothing is going to be the same again for almost any character in the book.
We're at the end of the show, and it would be very nice to end, if you could give us, with feeling, the last lines of Robert Brooks' The Old Vicarage, Grantchester.
Stands the church clock at 10 to 3, and is there honey still for tea? Is that the line? I always say, stand the church clock at 10 to 3, and is there arsenic still for tea?
Best-selling author P.D. James, upon reflection.
To see more UWTV classics, visit uwtv.org/classics.